Welcome to the web series, The Hero's Call, where champions of safety and justice in the community are profiled. The series is co-hosted by attorney Mark Diller and his colleague, Dr. John Naranja. Dr. John is both an attorney and a doctor.
Our country is in the midst of a racial and social justice crisis. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, race relations in this country are in the spotlight. Today on The Hero's Call, we welcome Dr. Tonisha Pinckney. Dr. Toni is a social justice advocate and activist. She's finding meaningful ways to make liberty and justice for all a reality. Dr. Toni, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Toni, I understand that you have 2 graduate level degrees in criminal justice. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
And also you're a criminal justice professor?
Yes, I'm a visiting professor of criminal justice at Salem State, as well as 2 other institutions.
Could you share with us a little bit about what it is that you teach criminal justice?
I teach people of color, crime, and justice. Most of the courses evolve around criminality and also issues within the justice.
How did you get so involved in being a social justice advocate and activist?
I'm not sure if I ever had a choice. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and lived in Irvington, New Jersey as well, but we lived kind of right on the edge at a time when crime and drugs and police overreach was at its height in New Jersey. And my mother kind of, at 3 years old, she taught me how to read. And one of the first poems she taught me how to read was I Too by Langston Hughes. And expressing to me how important it was to have faith and have education and try to be at the table and have these discussions. So as I grew up and experienced racism even as young as 7 years old, and walking by a neighbor's house at 12, seeing a noose around a tree after they told me not to walk by their property again. And then as I got older, being victimized through the domestic violence and sexual assault, seeing how the justice system responded, I don't think at any point I really, as a person morally, had a choice not to try to do something to make this world better, even if it was in the smallest way.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Toni. I understand that you do a lot of work with police forces. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. The work I do is sometimes unofficial as well as official. I talk with and meet with police departments across the country. We talk about things regarding race. The work I do is not to bash police officers. I feel like there's enough voices right now, and there has been enough voices saying what's wrong. My goal is to work with those that want to get it right. And in working with those that want to get it right, I've mentored a few police officers that's been accused of police brutality or overreach, and helping them understand why what they did was racially motivated, or was it classist, or was there some type of bias involved.
In what ways do you go ahead and work with and mentor the police officers? I know you talked about conversations, but can you share with us a little bit more about what steps you take to work with them?
But they reach out a lot of times because they heard that I work with someone else, and they feel as though, wait, I don't think what I did was racially motivated. I want somebody that understands the Black perspective, but is not police bashing. I want somebody who understands the criminal justice and the criminological perspective. The purpose is that if they made the mistake, helping them understand why, so that hopefully they won't make that same mistake again. And I use the word mistake loosely because a lot of times it is intentional, even if they don't know why. But to use their terms, if they made a mistake, how can they be better? How can they understand how to police communities of color? And yes, I deal with police officers of all races.
In our preparation for today, I seem to recall a statement that you made where you said when you work with people about race relations, you said, we have to give them time to get it right. Can you speak to the significance of that statement?
Yeah, there's two real reasons. One, race, the first slaves were brought over in the 1600s, right? We cannot undo 400 years of racial oppression and the emotions attached with them overnight. It's so ingrained in not only our justice systems, but our financial systems, our health center systems. It's going to take time to untangle those systems. And it's also going to take time, as we see with George Floyd, we're going to have moments of awakening where more and more people are going to come alive to what's going on. So that's something that organically takes time. And even in personal relationships, we fear when we see someone change overnight. We kind of think, wait a minute, is this going to last? Now, all of a sudden, you're this better person. We tend to trust that less than the person who is really taking the strides to get it right. So that's one of the reasons. The second reason is I don't want us to just look like things are better. I want things to be better. And I think if we're trying to change overnight and trying to get people to look better so that it's more comfortable for us, then we're just further ingraining our issues into the fabric of America. So it's really kind of, to me, a common sense approach of long-term change. And yes, there's going to be some people that are fighting for immediate action, and I need them to do that. For me, I'm looking at it more of the long game and making sure that me and other people like me are there and willing to do the long-term work, which is sometimes more heartbreaking.
Sure. Now, I know that you also do a lot of work in communities with having dialogues with different social justice or religious communities on race relations. Could you share with us a little bit about those initiatives and those collaborations that you have?
Sure. I can't assume that once I explain what the issue is, that your empathy, that other people's empathy will kick in and completely understand what I've been through. So that also entails listening to other groups' experiences and saying, okay, and this is how your experience made our experience feel, like our community feel, or what you went through, this is how it's similar to what we went through. And really attaching to the human experience, because one thing in our racial discussion that we forget about is we're not just having a race conversation, we're having a human conversation. And we're having a heart-to-heart conversation. And as maybe Dr. Jean will attest to, when you're having all of us, our hearts are the same inside. We're humans. And while there might be differences in how our heart might be affected or diseased or has to deal with certain issues, in general, our hearts are human. And so that's the part that I try to get to. Okay, on a human level, how can we fight this? How can we come to the most basic understanding of past civil rights, but human rights, and being able to coexist in a world and collaborate in this world, and not just say, okay, we're in this together, but what does that truly mean?
Sure.
First of all, it's a pleasure to meet you. And you had wrote a powerful piece that was published on media.com. It was entitled, Can We Live? I'd like to talk a little bit about that article because it was such a very articulate, and it defined a lot of things for me. Can we discuss this particular article in a little bit of detail?
Sure. When I wrote this, it was, as you know, the I Can't Breathe theme kind of goes along with some of the Black Lives Matter and protests, and they come from the various Black men especially who have died at the hands of police officers murdered, such as Eric Garner and George Floyd, because, and during those episodes, screamed out, "I can't breathe," even calling on George Floyd, even calling on his dead mother, saying, "I can't breathe." And it really hit me that, wow, you know, we are suffocated as a Black community. We're screaming, we can't breathe, and we want to live in so many different ways, including the ability for access to health care during COVID, but not just during COVID, but during everyday situations, having good health care, having access to natural foods and fresh vegetables, having access to loans and jobs, where just things that go on in our everyday life. It feels like to me that when I walk through my day, I'm holding my breath, where the moment that I walk in my door in the evening, I literally feel like that's the first breath that I've taken through the day since I left my house in the morning. And that breath is even short, because then when I discuss with my sons who are 19 and 21 about their day and their experiences, I'm holding my breath again because I'm hearing what they had to deal with. So do we deal with racism every day? For the most part. Can we breathe? Can we live? The other day, I ran out of gas for, I believe it was the first time in my life. And we had a great experience where a car with 3 white gentlemen stopped and actually took my son to the gas station. But immediately after they left, I took a picture and wrote down the license plate, because I realized that in America, there are people who are taking Black men, seeing them run down the street and shooting them in the back. And I couldn't even trust in that moment that they were doing something right for us. And then it came while I'm sitting there waiting for my son to come back. I'm sitting there in my car, and I hear a truck coming, blowing his horn. It was a red pickup truck. And he yells out the window, "That's what you get for being in a red Jag, you N-word." That's things where we're already dealing with what would be a bad moment for somebody else. Being stuck on the side of the road in 90-degree heat, right under the sun, that's difficult for anybody in that moment. But then I still have to deal with racial issues on top of that. So that's one of those things where it's like, can we just live? Can we just focus on our lives, good or bad, without all of this other stress and strain on top of it? I'm suffocating under the weight of racism and oppression. And there's no out for us. There's no decision that we can make to say that we don't want to deal with it. There's no staying home and staying away from it like we do with COVID, because it follows us throughout our day. It's on our television screens, it's on the news. So there's no escape from this suffocation.
Dr. Toni, there was one part of the article that touched me in particular, where you wrote about your 21-year-old son, and you were giving him a hug, and you wrote that you were sobbing uncontrollably. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, a lot of what I'm seeing in the news, they look like my son. My son is 6'8". He's actually almost 6'9", but he prefers 6'8". He's 6'8". He's tall and thin. He has short dreads in his hair, but he's also a student at Worcester State University. He's also a survivor of various health issues. He's a good kid. And I see that if he was walking down the street, no one would see the good kid in him. He would be a tall Black kid that threatens somebody. somewhere, and that it only takes one. That's the problem. It's not that it's one full race against another full race. It only takes one. Imagine the fear you go through when you find out there's a serial rapist in your state or a serial murderer in your state. It's only one person, and there's thousands of people, but everybody is scared of this one person. And that's what the Black community goes to. It only takes one to devastate our lives. And there's more than one. So when I looked at him and I hugged him and I thought about, I am so scared. So my kids, for color reasons, for health reasons, for life reasons, are just like those. And that it just broke me that at 21 and 19, where I'm supposed to celebrate my kids being independent, being raised by a single mother, and having a business, and they're independent young men, I'm supposed to celebrate that. And I'm more fearful now for their lives than when I was when they were little and didn't know how to be afraid of walking across the street. It's just that day when I hugged him and then he sobbed and I sobbed was indicative of even somebody like me who's trying to be out there and trying to change the world. I'm scared. And that was what that feeling was that day.
Right. No, thank you for sharing that. Shifting gears a little bit, as a physician, I have an interest in some of the disparities that are occurring with COVID and how it's affecting the Black and African American community as well as the Hispanic community. What is your perspective on the effects of COVID on minority communities?
And I want to expand that to also women, and especially women of color. A lot of times we're essential, or we just can't make the decision to stay home. So again, going back to the article that I wrote, we can't breathe even to be able to protect ourselves from an epidemic that is also taking our breath away. I was on COVID. I had to have 3 inhalers. I went back and forth to the doctor. I had pneumonia. I had all of this kind of stuff going on. And my access to care was because I had a certain privilege because of the people I knew. But if I had to call on other people, there was no access to care for me. There was no community doctors that were open for me. So it's just a lot of, I think COVID exposes, just like George Floyd exposed issues within the healthcare system and its ties to all the other systems involved, right? Like in other words, we've learned through COVID that we cannot disentangle racism and that we can't isolate any one system, that they're all connected in some way.
What's next for you? And where do you see over the next weeks and months that you're going to be focusing your attention on?
One of the things I'm focusing on right now is kind of addressing the term Black on Black crime, and that Black on Black crime is a fallacy, and helping people understand that Blacks are no more likely or just slightly more likely to commit crimes against their own as any other race. A recent study said that 80% of crimes are committed against Black on Black murders, and 70, I believe it was 74% or something like that, were white on white murders. So that Black on Black crime is a fallacy, and really talk about transitioning to just saying the general crime problem. The other thing is working with communities of color to be able to have those difficult conversations and come up with realistic and true measurable ways to suggest criminal justice and social justice reform, rather than restating the problem over and over again, but contributing to the solution. And then finally working with other communities, non-Black communities, law enforcement, and others to have a solid ongoing plan, to create ongoing plans within their institutions and organizations to be anti-racist openly and also anti-otherist, just so that we again can get to that place of all lives matter. Because we all do want all lives to matter, and that's where we're trying to get to.
Can you share with us, what can we and our community continue to do to help further this dialogue in a meaningful way and start to make a difference?
First, I think we all need to, and this is going to sound strange, but we all need to take a breath and listen. I think there's a lot of talking right now and not a lot of listening. And that's on every side there is. I had to remind myself that just yesterday. I was talking to someone about race, and I had to remind myself to shut up and listen to their perspective. Even though their perspective offended me, I said they need to get it out. And so that's why I kind of go on a listening tour. So I open up to, I even put it on social media. If you have questions or if you want to talk about your racial perspective in a non-threatening way, call me. I'm willing to talk to you about it and give you why your perspective, how it impacts us and help you understand the term. So I really suggest people do, that's a minimum thing. Just stop and listen and be available. The other thing is understand that it's going to take collaboration. It's going to take some compromise, but more collaboration, us trying to see what are the needs of us as a community, meaning an American community, and also what individual needs are. And I would say the final thing that an everyday person can do is not be racist.
Dr. Toni, I want to, on behalf of myself and Dr. John, thank you for what I consider to be a very powerful and meaningful conversation that we had today.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I want to say on behalf of the Heroes Call that our whole goal and focus is to have dialogues that will inspire other people to make meaningful differences in the world. And I know that you're doing that. And so we appreciate that. And we hope that you inspire other people to step up and have these meaningful dialogues and to also start making a difference towards ending racism and towards finally having a day when we can say liberty and justice for all is a reality. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dr. Toni.
Thank you.